Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and I'm here at Third Place Books in Lake Forest Park with Stuart Neville, author of Ratlines. Stuart, welcome to Author.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here, Bill.
So, Stuart, at what point did you think crime is for me, and if so, why?
It's no deep reason for it. It's really just a product of what I was reading.
From a young age, you were reading that?
Well, you know, when the first sort of grown-up books I read were horror novels. I grew up in the '80s, so Stephen King was the thing. Yeah. And then when I got a little bit older, I started reading more crime fiction. But it was James Ellroy and Ted Lewis and people like that I was reading. So the first couple of novels I tried to write were actually horror novels, but almost under their own steam. They kept gravitating towards thrillers. And it was actually the third novel I wrote, Ghost of Belfast, that was published as my debut. Yeah. And it actually does have that mixture of crime and a supernatural element as well. But it's really just that cocktail of what I grew up reading.
You know, I've always felt that writing itself, regardless of your genre, has, I might as well call it a supernatural element to it, because every writer goes through the experience of, however they phrase it, but sort of receiving this thing. They hear the characters talking to them, ideas appear to them, and whether it's crime or horror or fantasy or literature, you yourself, it seems like when dealing with your imagination, is dealing with something sort of beyond the physical. Does that make sense?
Doing so because you're kind of engaging the subconscious in a way that's very hard to rationalize sometimes. I mean, one of the real pleasures I find in writing a novel is when different threads of your story kind of come together and take you by surprise, as if on their own.
Yeah.
And I know rationally it is your subconscious has been kind of figuring these things out for you, but yeah, there is sometimes that feeling of plucking things out of the air, and certainly characters taking on a life of their own, which does happen quite often. But really, those are all just reflections of your own twisted psyche.
I suppose so, but you know, it's an interesting thing because what you said, the characters taking on a life of their own, that comment, which is so common for all fiction writers, is the one that hangs up a lot of devoted readers of fiction.
Yeah.
They always say, but you're the writer. They can't take on a life of their own, they're you. And yet, as a fiction writer, it feels as if it is their life, not yours.
Well, a very specific example for me was in my second novel, Collusion. There's a character called the Traveller who's a paid assassin, and he appears in, I think it's the second chapter, or the third chapter actually, he appears in for the first time. And he, I had planned up until the moment he actually appeared on stage and started talking. I had planned him to be this sort of quiet, reserved, kind of gentleman killer. Right. As soon as he opened his mouth, he turned into this really boorish, vulgar, coarse, angry man. And it just happened as I was writing it. It just kind of tumbled out that way. And I have no real explanation for how that happened, because it certainly wasn't a conscious decision on my part, because I had intended to be a very specific thing, and when it all of a sudden...
But you knew enough not to go against that.
Oh, yeah.
That when they start doing that, woe betide the writer who says, no, you're supposed to be quiet and reserved.
Yeah, I think it's a real danger when you're writers to try and second guess yourself. I think you do have to trust your instincts sometimes. You
know, you've somewhat tipped your hand on this, but I usually get this right, which is I would say, and writers fall into this one or other category, and I would say that you are not a strict outliner, that you maybe have some idea, but not much. Is that true?
It's very true. I need two things. I need a point of departure and a point of destination. I need to know where I'm going to start and where I'm going to end up. And everything between there is a process of discovery. And it's sometimes it's a fun way of writing, sometimes it's a scary way of writing. What tends to happen is I'll maybe get about a third of the way into a book and kind of hit a wall. And at that point then I need to step back and just figure out what I'm doing.
And do you start actually plotting out some things ahead?
Not so much plotting, because for me, plot is a function of character. Plot is not a series of events. Plot is the consequences of the choices the characters make.
Absolutely.
So when I do get stuck, when I hit that wall, what I do is look at the characters themselves, and specifically what are their desires, and An example is if say, John wants to kill Joe, okay? So John's desire is that Joe should die. Joe's desire is to live,
Right.
okay? And plot is the process of discovering how far either of those characters will go to achieve their desire. You know, and it just escalates and escalates. You know, how far can you push this? Is either of those people willing to sacrifice a member of their own family to achieve their desire? And it's that process of figuring out how far they will go is where plot comes from. It's not a car chase and a shooting and
Yes.
all this sort of stuff.
It's an excellent point, and sometimes when I'm trying to teach people writing and they're at a beginning phase, they see plot as like these chess pieces that they're moving around
Yeah.
and setting up. But I really feel it's exactly what you said, which is it is following the character.
Yeah.
And in that way, you can't really plan it out completely because they will, just like that, they will speak to you and go their way.
Yeah, it's an example. Another example is my third book, Stolen Souls. There was a character who was there to perform a function. The premise of that book is a young Ukrainian girl winds up smuggled into Belfast and escapes by killing one of her captors. And she's stranded alone in Belfast, and there was a guy who owned a van who was going to come and give her a lift and just transport her. And his only function in the story, up until I got to the point where he appeared, was to give her a lift.
Right.
But then I thought, well, every character has to have a desire, has to have something they want. They're there for a reason. So I sat down and tried to figure out why he would, in the middle of the night, come out to help this prostitute. And then I realized it's because he wants to kill her and steal her teeth. Okay, so your story then,
The story changed.
the story all of a sudden takes a big left turn. But that's an example of the characters driving the plot. You know, it's the thing about plot is every single thing that happens in your plot should be inevitable.
Yes.
Once those characters have made those choices, that thing can't not happen. It has to happen because of their desires and the conflicts between them. And it's something you see, particularly in modern screenwriting, I think, in sort of big Hollywood films, where incident is confused with plot. You know, a whole series of explosions and fist fights and all that stuff. It's not plot. The plot is...
Plot has an energy and
Yeah.
moving in a direction.
Exactly.
So, Stuart, I'd like you to finish the sentence for me. If writing, just writing, has taught you anything, it has taught you what?
I'm gonna use a quote. I attended a talk that Joel Schumacher gave at a film festival in France. So I was lucky to be invited to, and his phrase in that was, "Don't let anyone piss on your dreams." I've talked to school kids, and particularly where I come from, in sort of small town Northern Ireland, kids are taught, you know, you have to you have to follow this career path. You can't be an actor, you can't be a writer, you can't be an artist, you can't be this. Those aren't proper jobs. But what I'm able to tell those kids, just from my hometown, my own area, I'm a professional writer, I know 2 professional actors. The cinematographer, who's been Oscar nominated several times, did the cinematography on the Avengers movie just recently, and so on. He's just from down the road. When the school tells you you can't do those kinds of jobs, yes, you can. And what it takes, if you have the talent and you can apply the work, you can do that kind of career. And I think writing has taught me that. You know, as a younger person, I believe that that kind of career was only for people from London or New York, and so on. So yeah, writing has taught me to follow your dreams, if I may use it.
But it's a good point because someone has to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't all come from this little bubble in the big cities.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not that it's easy, and it's not that everybody
No.
will succeed. But if you have the talent and a certain amount of luck as well, you can make a living in the arts. And it bothers me that so many kids are told otherwise.